Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with the Eerie News, and today is August 3rd, 2024. Saturday, August 3rd, 2024. And let's start off with a story about a treasure. Not only a treasure, a cursed treasure. This story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Curse of Fenn's Treasure. In 2010, Forrest Fenn, the owner of a gallery in Santa Fe, hid a bronze treasure chest that weighed 20 pounds and contained gold nuggets, rare coins, jewelry, and gemstones estimated to be worth $2 million. He wrote a book with hints as to where the treasure was hidden. The romance and adventure titillated treasure hunters to search New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. However, what many of them found was unusual and premature death. There were many that could not resist the siren's call of finding a treasure with a map in the form of a poem found in Fenn's memoirs titled The Thrill of the Chase, which he wrote in 2010. But like many tales of easy fortunes, there's a downside, and it appeared that Fenn's treasure didn't want to be found. Some would call it superstition and others bad luck, but those who measure the odds considered it was cursed. The public was introduced to Forrest Fenn's challenge when an article was written in August 2012 about the hidden treasure. Fenn described where, quote, he tossed in ancient figurines, a 17th century Spanish ring, and turquoise beads excavated from a cliff dwelling near Mesa Verde. He added American Eagle gold coins, gold nuggets, a vial of gold dust, 2 gold discs, and a lot of jewelry, including rubies, sapphires, and diamonds. Among these wonders included a copy of his own autobiography rolled and stuffed into an ancient olive jar. End quote. Forrest Fenn was a native Texan who arrived in Santa Fe in 1972 after retiring from the Air Force, where he served as a fighter pilot. He had a modest pension, a high school education, and no background in the antiquities market. But in a short time, he became a successful dealer. By his own admission, he had been collecting unusual and old things since he was a child. His first discovery was an old arrowhead. For 20 years, he ran a successful art gallery, and he also sold Native American antiquities. 2009, an undercover agent toured his house, which had a collection to rival what was found at his gallery, for an operation code named Cerberus Action. The FBI and Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, raided his home based on a suspicion of grave robbing and illegally obtained artifacts. They found nothing. The following year, he stashed his lockbox and laid the seeds for thousands of hopeful hunters to scour through national parks and anywhere that corresponded to his clues. Randy Bilyeu moved west in order to search for Fenn's treasure. Then the 54-year-old mysteriously disappeared in January 2016. He had scouted an area close to Bandelier National Monument. On January 5th, he took a GPS device, his dog Leo, and set out on a raft on the Rio Grande. He didn't return, and his family issued a missing persons report. On January 15th, only his dog and raft were found. In the raft was a map related to the treasure hunt and food, and information about blog entries where treasure hunters shared their experiences and thoughts on what the clues in the poem meant. An intensive search spread out in the area, but it wasn't until the summer of 2016 that Bilyeu's skeletal remains were discovered by a crew with the Army Corps of Engineers along the Rio Grande. Due to the condition of the remains, an autopsy could not determine why he died. He didn't have any broken bones or other skeletal injuries. It's theorized he was caught in winter in a remote spot where the temperature dropped to below freezing, and he died from hypothermia or dehydration. He suffered from high blood pressure, which could have also caused his death. Leo was eventually adopted by a flight nurse, Erin Johnson, who was part of the medical helicopter crew sent out to look for Randy. Randy Bilyeu's ex-wife Linda said, "There's no treasure, it's not real, he lost his life for a hoax." Linda Bilyeu, along with others, asked Fenn to end the treasure hunt. His reply was, quote, "As with deer hunters and fishermen, there's an inherent risk that comes with hiking the canyons and mountain trails. The treasure is not hidden in a dangerous spot, and I have said that no one should search in a place where an 80-year-old man could not hide it." End quote. The poem that sent many flocking to different areas in the Southwest in search of a treasure. If you want to, just go to Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and you can read it there. I could see where people were getting houses several clues, but open to interpretation. So if you want to read it, you could go there and check it out. But anyway, then fast forward, Randy Billiard dies in 2016. Then 2017, this was a deadly year for Fenn treasure hunters. Jeff Murphy, 53, from Batavia, Illinois, was found dead from a fall while hiking on Turkey Pen Peak in Yellowstone National Park near the north entrance of the park. His wife had reported him missing the day before, on June 8, 2017. Initially, the officials at Yellowstone were mum about the details of Murphy's case, but a FOIA request from KULR-TV found that Murphy's wife had told authorities he was searching for the treasure when he went into the park. This was revealed in 2018, and Murphy was added as the fourth person to die while searching for the treasure. So in other words, later on it comes to find out that he really was a second person to die, but because they had suppressed the fact that he was searching for Fenn's treasure, he wasn't counted as one of those who had lost their lives while attempting to do that. Then in June, this would be a month after Jeff Murphy died, Pastor Paris Wallace, age 52, went hunting for Fenn's treasure, and he disappeared in the area of Española, New Mexico. The landscape is full of arroyos and steep mountains, but he had gone alone and kept the reason to himself. His wife reported him missing when he failed to show up for a planned family meeting on June 14th. By then, Wallace had been missing for 40 hours. Wallace had a friend named Wendell Smith, who himself had gone on 19 trips to find Fenn's treasure. On a hunch that Wallace was out seeking the treasure, he posted a message on a 2,500-member chat group where participants discussed Fenn's clues. A woman with the username Life's Ablaze went to scout an area she was familiar with and that matched some of the clues Fenn wrote about. Within 2 hours, she found Wallace's vehicle just north of Pilar. Until then, law enforcement was using cell phone technology, but she was the one that actually found his car near the Taos Junction Bridge just north of Pilar. His belongings were found at a roadway inn in Española and his backpack in the waters of the Rio Grande, a few miles downstream. His body was found in the Rio Grande Gorge, 5 to 7 miles from where his car was left parked. Wallace had drowned while trying to cross the Rio Grande. A month later, Eric Ashby, 31, went missing. He too was searching for Fenn's treasure. His raft capsized on the Arkansas River, and he was last seen clinging to a rock. In an ironic twist, he moved to Colorado 4 months before, specifically to search for the treasure. Little did he imagine he was hunting for his own death. Eric told his father, Paul, that he was going to the Arkansas River to search for the treasure. He drowned on June 28th, and his companions didn't report his disappearance until 10 days later. A week after he left with companions to hunt the treasure, a woman called Paul Ashby on the phone and said, "Mr. Ashby, your son is drowned. I'm sorry. Mr. Ashby, your son is dead." Then she hung up. The caller was Rebecca Nees, also known as Becca Nees, who worked with Eric. She, along with Eric and 3 men, met at the river, all with the same intent of finding the treasure. They'd even drawn up a contract detailing how they'd split the find. She explained to authorities that Eric told them he swam the river 10 times before, and they thought he would be okay, even though he was in a 2-person raft with no life preserver. According to her, 2 men went back to find him, and they saw a photographer who told them he called 911. She said they returned to their car and went home. Nee said they left because they were scared because they had never been involved in anything like that. Eric's body was not positively identified until the end of January 2018. The body had been discovered in July, but the sheriff's department described it as unidentifiable. His father provided DNA which was matched to a sample taken during the autopsy and confirmed the identity of the body recovered. His death inspired the creation of Eric's Law, a proposal to hold responsible a person who fails to help those in life-threatening situation. In 2020, Shannon Thompson, age 33, went in search for Fenn's treasure in New Mexico's Santa Fe National Forest. 7 miles in, she realized she was lost. She spent 2 nights in freezing weather before the New Mexico State Police found her. She almost became a member of the Fenn's treasure dead pool. One that was not so lucky was Mike Sexton, 53, who was convinced the treasure was along the Colorado-Utah border in Dinosaur National Monument. He'd made a dozen trips there, but he involved his poker buddy Stephen Inlow because he needed a four-wheel drive truck to further his explorations. In February 2020, both men rented automobiles in Denver. The snowmobiles got stuck because they were too heavy for the snow depth. They were rescued and they returned the following month. This time they rented snowmobiles out of Utah, leaving their truck 5 miles from the main road along with part of their provisions. They were exploring the south side of the mountain, and this time they ran out of snow. They left more supplies in the snowmobiles and set off on foot with a sled to hopefully carry the treasure back, which Mike was convinced was close. They only had energy bars and a gallon and a half of water for the two of them. When the men failed to return the snowmobiles to the rental company, they called the police, who in turn called Mike's girlfriend and Stephen's wife. Both men were in an area with no cell signal. The next day it started to snow, and they had no water left. They tried eating snow, but Steve Inlow finally drank his own urine, and it warmed his body. He told Mike to do the same, but he refused, saying he'd rather die. 2 days later, Mike died of hypothermia. The next day, Stephen was rescued. Their vehicle was only a mile from where they were found. This was the last and final death tied to Fenn's treasure. On June 6, 2020, Forrest Fenn made a brief post on a blog used by the searcher community, which read, quote, "It was under a canopy of stars in the lush forested vegetation of the Rocky Mountains and had not moved from the spot where I hid it more than 10 years ago. I do not know the person who found it, but the poem in my book led him to the precise spot. I congratulate the thousands of people who participate in this search and hope they will continue to be drawn by the promise of other discoveries. So the search is over. Look for more information and photos in the coming days," end quote. Fenn didn't specify who found it or the location. On September 7, 2020, Forrest Fenn died at his home from a heart attack. He had just turned 90 years old. A lawsuit forced the Fenn family to disclose the finder of Fenn's treasure. His name was Jack Stoof, a medical student who started searching for it in 2018. Many of the searchers were not convinced with the story. They believed that Forrest knew he would not live long, and his family was dealing with negative repercussions tied to the treasure hunt. In 2018, Robert Miller was arrested after he broke into the Fenn home and was stealing a Spanish-style chest he believed was a treasure box. There were also threats against the family, probably with their urging Fenn look for someone to be the finder of the treasure. Some believed the treasure hunt was legitimate, but others thought it had never existed to begin with. Jack Stoof denied being employed by Fenn or being picked to find the treasure. On September 10, 2022, Stoof sold the treasure to Tesoro Sagrado Holdings LLC, which placed 476 pieces up for auction. The sale held in December 2022 netted $1.3 million. Forrest was known for an old saying that two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. And there you go. These are all grown-up people who I can understand the attraction, but who, I don't know, it's almost like they took leave of their senses to the point, in some cases, where they went out there alone, like this gentleman, Pastor Paris. He goes out there alone, and thankfully one of these people on the blog or the forum kind of figures out where he's at. Doesn't tell anybody. And then there's something here that I've always thought about. Supposedly this gentleman hid his treasure 10 years before. And it's one of those things that you're thinking, what if, let's go down that rabbit hole. What if there was a treasure hunter who, one of these guys that was following his, clues, finds it and never says anything. Says, well, this is mine. Boop. Closes his mouth and doesn't say a word. Okay, in other words, he doesn't care about the fame. He doesn't care. All he cares about is, I found this thing. My point is, it makes you wonder, after Forrest Fenn left that treasure there, did he ever go back and check to see if it was still there? Because here are these people running around, 5 of them lost their lives, or, did he ever go back to check, is it still there? Because again, he was risking somebody could find it and not say a word. I don't know. Just one of those things that's, or maybe all these people that said that Fenn's treasure was not real to begin with. Maybe they were right. Who knows? Hmm. Food for thought, huh? Food for thought. Anyway, let's go off to our next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Strange Fate of the Cyclops, right? Let's see if this works. Let's see. In a strange foreshadowing of things to come, in early March 1918, it was reported by the Navy that Willie J. Nettles, coxswain on the USS Cyclops, was drowned on February 10 when he was swept overboard. His body was never recovered from the waters off Brazil. Willie Nettles joined the Navy in 1913 when he was 16 years old. In July 1915, his parents died within 2 weeks of each other, leaving only his married sister Maud as a relative. None would have suspected that his shipmates would soon share his fate. The USN Cyclops was the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy. Powered by steam, she was 550 feet long, and since 1910 she traveled between the Caribbean, Mexico, and the Baltic Sea, moving coal and refugees from port to port. In 1917, due to World War I, she transported troops and coal to fuel ships around the world. In February 1918, she left Rio de Janeiro loaded with tons of dense manganese ore. 2 days later, she stopped at Salvador, Brazil. On February 22nd, the ship left for Baltimore with no stops planned. However, the Cyclops docked in Barbados because the water level was over the Plimsoll line, used to indicate if a ship was overloaded. When she left Brazil, it was thought the ship was overloaded, which was a risky situation, since before leaving from Baltimore, Commander Worley reported the starboard engine was not operating due to a cracked cylinder. The survey board recommended that repairs would be made when the vessel returned to the United States. On March 3rd, a telegram was sent to the West Indian Steamship Company in New York City, which read, quote, "Advertised charterers, USS Cyclops arrived Barbados. 3 March for bunkers. Expect to arrive Baltimore 13 March OPNAV," which I imagine stands for Operations Navy. End quote. The next day, the collier departed Barbados. No distress call was ever received. The last message was, "Weather fair, all well." This was all ever heard of the Cyclops. Later investigations completed in Rio de Janeiro confirmed the ship was properly loaded and secured, but conflicting reports found that Captain Worley left inexperienced crew to load the ship while in Brazil. Initially, the Navy denied the vessel had disappeared, but less than 30 days later, the news stories had become grim. It seemed the USS Cyclops, a Navy collier, could not be located. By the end of April, hopes faded. President Woodrow Wilson announced, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." The Navy sent in personnel to question fishermen along the coast of the West Indian Islands, retracing the route the ship took when it left Barbados. 2 months had gone by and ships scoured the waters, but no trace of wreckage was found. It was feared she had been captured or sunk by a German submarine or raider. The ore she carried could be used to produce munitions. The German authorities, then and after the war, denied any knowledge of having intercepted the Cyclops. There were 57 passengers, mostly Navy personnel, 5 prisoners, 21 officers, and a crew of 230. The total number lost has been estimated from 297 to 309. Between March 9th and 10th, a storm covered the Virginia Capes area. Captain E.C. Hilliard, the captain of the Amalco, sighted the Cyclops on March 9th, 1918. He later told the Navy, quote, "If I had been carrying manganese ore, I could not have survived the gale," end quote. This report was discounted since it was estimated that since the Cyclops was not expected in Baltimore until March 13, she could not have been in the waters off Virginia on March 9th. Questions abounded. However, there were no answers. Did her cargo break the Cyclops in two? Did her cargo shift and capsize her? Was she sunk by an internal explosion? Was she sunk by a submarine or a mine? Was she captured by the Germans? Was she surrendered through treachery, or was she spurlos versenkt, which translates to sunk without a trace? In the months that followed, without proof of her fate, the Navy stated, "Many theories have been advanced, but none that satisfactorily accounts for her disappearance." On June 1st, 1918, the ship was officially declared lost with all hands. Strangely, her sister ships eventually shared the same fate, three of them in the same year. The Proteus became part of the Canadian Merchant Navy in 1941 and was lost at sea 7 months later while she traversed the Caribbean Sea. A crew of 50 went down with her, and the ship has never been found. The Nereus was sold to the Aluminum Company of Canada in 1941 and was lost 10 months after she departed the U.S. Virgin Islands with a load of bauxite ore. The wreck has never been located. She was following the same route as the Cyclops. The loss of the Nereus was blamed on catastrophic structural failure. The Cyclops and her two sisters' ships disappeared while traversing the Bermuda Triangle. The fourth collier of the group, the Jupiter, was converted in 1920 into the U.S. Navy's first aircraft carrier and was renamed the USS Langley. She was later converted into a seaplane tender and was finally sunk by Japanese aircraft in the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942. This was within months of the loss of the Proteus and the Nereus. Most of the survivors were transferred to another ship, the USS Picos, and this was also later bombed and sunk, with the Japanese machine gunning the survivors in the water. After the Proteus and Nereus were lost, the disappearance of the Cyclops is now theorized to also be a result of structural failure, where the I-beams that ran the length of the ship eroded due to the contents of her cargo. However, unless her wreck is ever found, this could not be confirmed. During the investigation of the Cyclops, her captain, Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, came under scrutiny. He was born John Frederick Wickman in Germany in 1862. He jumped ship in San Francisco in 1878. 20 years later, he changed his surname to Worley and he ran a saloon on the Barbary Coast. By then, some of his brothers had also immigrated to the United States. He gained a qualification as a ship's master and commanded several merchant ships, transporting cargo, some legal and some not. It was rumored that when he voyaged to the Far East, he brought opium back. Worley developed a reputation as being a harsh captain that brutalized and berated his crew, including officers, for minimal transgressions. On February 21, 1917, he was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the Naval Auxiliary Reserve. Later it was determined he would leave inexperienced men to oversee the loading of the cargo. Whether deserved or not, there were those who suspected he was a German sympathizer. Prior to the declaration the Cyclops had been lost, Worley's wife Selma visited newspaper offices requesting the suppression of an interview she had given about her husband's change of name and his birth in Germany. She said he came as a child and changed his name to honor his foster father. This was not accurate, since he was 16 years old when he came to the United States and changed his surname in Washington prior to entering the Navy. His sister-in-law, Anna M. Angerman, confirmed to newspapers their family name was Wickman. This information prompted an investigation by the Navy, which examined Worley's records, where he listed San Francisco as his birthplace, which was a lie. There was a brother, Herman Wickman, who never altered his name. Near the time the search for the Cyclops was called off, a telegram was received by the State Department from Charles Ludlow Livingston, the U.S. Consul on Barbados, which read, quote, Master Cyclops stated that required 600 tons coal, having sufficient on board to reach Bermuda, engines very poor condition, not sufficient funds, and therefore requested payment by me, unusually reticent. I have a certain he took here, when he means here, he means the captain. I have a certain he took here fresh meat, ton flour, 1,000 pounds vegetables, paying therefore $775. From different sources gather the following. He had plenty of coal, alleged inferior, took coal to mix, probably had more than 1,500 tons. Master alluded to by others as damned Dutchman, apparently disliked by other officers. Rumored disturbances en route hither, men confined and one executed. Also had some prisoners from the fleet in Brazilian waters, one life sentence. United States Consul General Gottschalk passenger. 231 crew exclusive of officers and passengers. Have names of crew but not of all the officers and passengers. Many Germanic names appear. Numbered telegraphic or wireless messages addressed to master or in care of ship were delivered at this port. All telegrams for Barbados are on file head office at St. Thomas. I have to suggest scrutiny there, While not having any definite grounds, I fear fate worse than sinking, though possibly based on this instinctive dislike felt towards Master. Okay, from there you're getting that there was suspicion of him. He was, even though he was German, he was called the damn Dutchman. And they're looking at, I don't know, because he's German, was it, or were there people sympathizers? In other words, what's going on? And maybe it could just have just been suspicion because they were at war, but who knows? Anyway, to continue, the following letter, dated December 31st, 1917, was written at the YMCA, located in Norfolk Navy Yard, prior to the ship leaving on its last voyage. It was written by Edward Scott Morgan Jr., age 23, to his brother Clarence. Their mother, Ida, passed away in September 1919, at the age of 53, less than 2 years after her son was lost at sea. Perhaps the heartbreak was too much. She'd already lost a daughter in 1891, age 8, from croup. This is what Edward wrote. Dear brother Clarence, on this, the last day of the old year, I sit here in the YMCA thinking of home. Clarence, we are preparing for a trip which will last about 6 months. We sail for the Falkland Islands in the near future. From there we visit the Philippines, so you can judge how long it will take us to go and return. To go to the Falkland Islands, it will take 28 days. Do not worry about me, as I am in the best of health, and I expect to have the best time of my life. I am working in the machine shop, so I have a soft time of it, and furthermore, I will be rated 2-class fireman on January 10th, so I will then receive $41 per month. I have not had a slow moment since I have been in, and the prospects for slow times are small for the next 6 months. So I want you, mother, and all at home to live happy and forget your worries as I have done. Boy, at the rate I'm going, I will be an oiler when I return home, and also as big as a house. Boy, as soon as I joined the Navy, I had no worries, and I began to enjoy life. Give mother all my best wishes of the season, and tell them that when the songbirds and the roses bloom, I will return home again. Ewing can tell you where the islands lie. We will go through the Panama Canal. There will be no U-boats to worry us, so you need not worry about that part of it. That's the letter of a young, hopeful man on a New Year's Eve. Little did he know what was going to happen in a few weeks. In January 1922, the Greensboro Daily News described that within 2 weeks after the Cyclops sailed, and at least a month before she was reported as missing, a notice appeared in a Rio de Janeiro newspaper stating that a requiem mass would be celebrated for the American consul general lost at sea in the American collier Cyclops. Americans in Brazil inquired about the announcement. However, the newspaper in question disclaimed any knowledge of the person who had inserted the notice. American Secret Service agents tried to trace the clues of the newspaper clipping, but by then it was too late. The man who brought it for publication had disappeared. It was never explained how he knew about the disappearance of the Cyclops before it was made public. This fed into the theory that one of the Cyclops passengers, Alfred Louis Moreau Gottschalk, American Consul General at Rio de Janeiro, was instrumental in stirring up sentiment throughout Brazil in favor of the Allied forces. Anonymous messages were made threatening his life prior to his return to the U.S. There was also the belief that if not sunk by the Germans, the ship was taken in order to use her large cargo of manganese. After the signing of the armistice, American authorities examined all naval German records, and there was no reference to the Cyclops. The only exception to this theory was that the ship was sunk by a submarine who itself failed to return to port. It was also noted that among the ships that had disappeared in those years, the Cyclops was the only one equipped with wireless. In 1922, a supposed message in a bottle from a member of the Cyclops washed up on the North Carolina coast. It was found near where the Carol A. Deering was last seen before she beached on Diamond Shoals. The Navy investigated, and it was discredited when it turned out the message was found on an island off the coast of Washington and supposedly emanated from Japanese sources. This was not the first time a message in a bottle was discovered. There was a report from August 1918 when another message in a bottle washed ashore at Quarantine Island at the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. The message, written in a hurried hand, read, "Our collier Cyclops captured by German submarine off Virginia coast." This was not the end of these discoveries. In October 1926, another message scratched on a scroll of birch bark was found in a sealed bottle, entangled in a heap of seaweed off the coast of Massachusetts. Its sealed cap was oxidized from exposure. It read, SS Cyclops is sinking, 161 men on board, 10 degrees 6 minutes, 10 degrees 40 minutes. GP Arm USN. Parts of the message were indecipherable. However, it was noted that among the roster of the missing crew, there were two names resembling the scrawled signature. One was George Jones Arminger and the other Robert Armstrong. In 1968, Master Navy diver Dean Hawes found a large wreck in 180 feet of water about 40 miles northeast of Cape Charles while he was searching for a lost submarine, the Scorpion. He surfaced with the intention of returning with a dive team, but bad weather forced them to abandon the endeavor and return to Norfolk. The Scorpion was located near the Azores, and the Navy decided not to return where a solitary buoy had been left to mark Hawes' discovery. Dean Hawes returned years later, but by then he had compared a picture of the Cyclops to what he had seen, and he believed they were the same ship. On that trip they found a different wreck, not the Cyclops. Hawes believed that due to the storm and operating only on one engine, the ship went off course and ended up northeast of the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. Dean Hawes has since passed away. In 1931, the Brooklyn Daily printed a story titled Sabotage on Cyclops Before Fatal Voyage, bared by ex-officer. Henry Charles Ryder, originally from Brooklyn, was once an ensign engineer on the Cyclops, up to the evening before her last voyage. The day before the Cyclops left from Norfolk for Rio de Janeiro, Ryder was transferred to the USS Azama and escaped the fate of his shipmates. When he came to the Kings County American Legion seeking employment, he told a story of mysterious happenings on the ship. He believed the ship was deliberately sunk by German agents who destroyed all flotsam. The soft-spoken Ryder was allegedly pressed to tell a story of strange signal lights and intrigue. He retold of a prior voyage from France to New York. This was his story. Quote, there was a general spirit of uneasiness among the crew. There was talk of 5 German spies being on board. Suspicion was rampant. The more disturbing because nothing could be found at first which seemed to warrant it. Then came the direct evidence. One day the rope hoists of a lifeboat were found cleanly cut. A quick inspection of the hoist of the other lifeboat hoists was made. Every one of them had been cut clean with a keen blade. The lifeboats had been rendered virtually useless in an emergency. There was a quiet investigation. It was never learned who was responsible, but the feeling of unrest among the crew was intensified. From New York we went up to Halifax. Suspicion began to center on several men. One of them was in my gang in the engine room. It was reported to me that this man had been seen with a sledgehammer near one of the valves. From that time on, I kept him on extra hours of duty and remained on duty myself, until we were both physically exhausted, so that I could keep him constantly under my eye. On the way back from Halifax to New York, one of the officers discovered that a light had been run up on the mainmast. Further investigation disclosed wires and a key. The lamp had been rigged as a blinker signal. Again, investigation failed to disclose who was responsible. Of course, it was wartime, and we were running without lights. Then one night, Ensign Roy T. Smith, on duty on the bridge, saw light flashing from the quarters of the medical officers aft on the starboard. He told me it appeared to be a pocket flashlight and was being used to signal. Fearing a reprimand if he left his post on the bridge to make an immediate investigation for getting aft on the Cyclops was no simple matter. He did not report it to the captain until he went off duty in the morning. The result was another fruitless inquiry. If she had merely foundered and sunk, there would have been a wreckage of some kind, adrift or washed ashore during all these years. What became of the life rafts? What became of all the other things that would have floated? The water pressure undersea alone would have been sufficient to tear the lifeboats loose. Fragments, at least, of the battered boats would have come to the surface. It is my belief that the plotters had ample time to destroy all traces. It is possible, I merely offer it as a possibility, that they succeeded in poisoning the food of all on board and then jammed everything that would float in the hold of the collier before they sank her. It is also possible that they scuttled or blew up the ship, escaped to a German vessel with whom they had been in signal communication, and after the destruction of the Cyclops painstakingly destroyed all floating wreckage. End quote. The same article described where a year before a former Marine sergeant said that a man with who he chanced to room in Texas with had left behind a diary. The entries told of a story of how the writer, along with four other men, packed dynamite around the engine of the Cyclops with plans to escape to a waiting German vessel. Only two of them made it. The writer of the diary, who was supposed to be a chance acquaintance of the Marine, was never found. The news story went on to describe that Lieutenant James M. Hayes, navigating officer on the collier Orion, a month after the Cyclops was lost, sighted a life preserver en route which he suspected belonged to the Cyclops. He reported to the captain, but he refused to put the ship off her course to pick up what Hayes had seen. In February 1920, Donald Fraser, a Chicagoan, reported that on Gun Key in the Bahamas he had found fragments of a lifeboat with the U.S. Cyclops stenciled on it. He also described a sunken hull of a ship 2,000 yards off the key. The Navy never found the wreckage. Quote, not a bit of the wreckage nor sign of any description has been found. Usually a wooden bucket or cork life preserver identified as belonging to the lost ship is picked up after a wreck, but not so with the Cyclops. She just disappeared as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths of the ocean. And the sadness of her destruction is amplified by the absence of any wireless calls for help being picked up by any ship along the route that the Cyclops followed. This next part talks about the prisoners who were on board. On December 1917, Oscar Stewart, age 17, a third-class fireman, was murdered as a result of an altercation on the armored cruiser USS Pittsburgh while at anchor with a South American squadron off the coast of Brazil. He was found in a pool of blood in one of the boiler rooms. Court-martialed for the offense was Bernard DeVoe, Moss Whiteside, and James Coker. Whiteside received 15 years, DeVoe life in prison, and Coker death. With the exception of Coker, the others, including two deserters, were taken aboard the Cyclops as passengers, albeit in irons, bound for the brig at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. U.S. Consul to Barbados C. Ludlow Livingston hinted in his letter that one of these men may have been executed on Worley's orders before they reached Barbados. It's unknown if this person was Coker, since his name does not appear on any of the Cyclops lists. In addition to the prisoners, 42 men from the Pittsburgh were sent stateside on the Cyclops for reassignment. After the loss of the Cyclops, a rumor circulated, one of many, that some of the men from the Pittsburgh were said to be friends of those convicted in connection with the murder. It was hinted that a mutiny had been planned. James Coker would be transferred to the Cyclops for his execution. Their friends would mutiny to free his accomplices. The crew would mutiny to free Lieutenant Harvey Forbes, with the result that a captain known as the Damn Dutchman, who was going insane, would lose command of the ship. Whether these rumors were grounded in truth will never be known, as all those who could say otherwise took their truth, secrets, and regrets to a watery grave. Perhaps the Cyclops was cursed along with her sister ships, or claimed by a mysterious force that exists between those 3 points of the Devil's Triangle. Although the ship disappeared on March 4, 1918, the designated date of death for everyone on board is June 14, 1918. The loss of the Cyclops is often described as the single largest loss of U.S. Navy lives not directly involving combat. Good question, right? Let's see, maybe one of these days they will find her. But what was the truth? Did she sink? Was she sabotaged? Or was she taken over? And like they said, even if she was sunk, let's say, and the submarine that sank her itself went down. In other words, nobody to say otherwise. Interesting, huh? Okay, next story is out of the Star, and it's titled 35-Foot Horned Beast is America's Answer to Loch Ness Monster Lurking in Florida River. Here we go. For decades, residents of a Florida town have been enthralled by the mystery of a 35-foot-long creature allegedly lurking in the nearby waters. The first reported sighting of the so-called St. John's River monster happened in 1849, when a sea captain was quoted in a local newspaper called The Examiner, claiming his own and the attention of the crew was riveted upon an immense sea monster which he took to be a serpent. Since then, the beast, nicknamed Johnny because of the river it supposedly inhabits, has been a mainstay in the imagination of the residents of Astor, a town which neighbors the haunted waters. Okay. Over the years, boaters who claimed they spied the monster have described it as gray-horned and four-legged, with a weird appetite for hyacinths. Some witnesses' accounts include both seeing skulking among the Florida waves or, more alarmingly, crawling around the riverbanks. Some have theorized that Johnny, often spoken about as America's answer to the Loch Ness Monster, is a prehistoric creature that survived to modern times. The biggest swath of sightings occurred in 1953 when loads of people jumped on the river monster craze at once. During that year, the Orlando Sentinel spoke to Astor Man and river guide Buck Dillard, who told reporters he spotted the creature's head pop out of the water while he was taking a couple fishing in Lake Dexter. He looked at us for about a minute, then he went under the water and swam underwater away from us, Dillard said. We waited about 2 hours in that same spot to see if he would come up again, but he didn't. A creature with the same description was later reported in Blue Creek and then the Astor Bridge. Then President Homer Wright said at the time, "The thing has been seen by many reliable persons. I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the wilds of Florida there weren't some creature like that monster." However, some naysayers claim the beast was probably just a manatee that had been exaggerated by witnesses. One of the main arguments was that there was a noticeable drop in the amount of hyacinths that lined the water's edge, but many claim this was just the work of a standard everyday cow. If you've ever been up in that country and have seen a cow come up with eelgrass and weeds all over its head, you might imagine it was a monster, said former Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commissioner John DeQueen. They stick their heads under the water to get in the eelgrass. Regardless, the myths about Johnny still persist to this day. These are most likely kept alive by amateur cryptozoologist Simon Smith, who lives near to the river and is convinced not only that the beast exists, but that it's also a girl. I wonder, they don't say why. Why does he think it's a girl? I don't know. There's a big, I'm trying to think, how could you convince a sea serpent kind of Loch Ness monster with a cow? Well, either with a manatee, forget it, or with a cow. I don't know. You either got to go check your eyes. I don't know about that part. But anyway, isn't it great? The weirder, the better. I'll be back soon with more strange news. Till next time.